Hi everybody, my name is Mike Parsons. I'm the Marketing Director for Universum Asia Pacific. I hope everybody is doing well. Thanks for joining us. I think we have a really great session lined up for you today. So across the next 40 to 50 minutes, we're going to be taking a deeper look at attracting and managing a multi-generational workforce. For those of you who know Universum, you'll know that this is a subject very close to our hearts. At the very end of 2014, where we released our first major study on this topic, we focused on millennials and released a 6-part report series around that study. For that study, we worked with INSEAD and the Head Foundation. Now, fast forward to the beginning of 2017, and we're releasing our second large generational study. This time, however, spanning generations X, Y, and Z. Once again, we've teamed up with the experts at INSEAD's Emerging Market Institute and the Head Foundation, but this time we've also picked up a third partner, the MIT Leadership Center, who are part of the revered Michigan Institute of Technology. This year, there will be 3 distinct reports and 3 freely available ebooks. This webinar is based on the first of those reports, which focuses on generations within the workplace. The other 2 are going to be themed around technology and leadership, and they're going to be coming very soon. In fact, for those who are already Universum members, you will have the second book already, the second of the deep dive reports, as well as the first, and the third coming soon. For those of you who are not members, you'll be able to download the free ebook, the first one from our website, and the second one will be coming out in about 2 weeks' time. Of course, if any non-members would like to get themselves on Access, which is our membership portal that houses all of the deep dive reports, get in touch with us anytime and we can help provide you some information on that. Okay, so the person to take you through today's short journey is Universum Asia Pacific Senior Vice President and Global Employer Branding Advisor, Rachele Focardi. I've worked with Rachele for several years now. I can tell you that she's deeply passionate about anything generational. She talks and delivers workshops on attracting and managing generational workforces all over the globe. Although she's based in Asia, Rachele has worked extensively across the US and Europe as well, so this session should be really good no matter where you're tuning in from. Before I hand over, I just wanted to remind you to use the question feature to send in questions as we go along. At the end, Rachele and I will try and answer as many of these as we can in the given time. If there's anything we don't have time for, Rachele, myself, or any of our colleagues in your local markets can help, so please do reach out. And of course, we will send a follow-up email to all of you. This will contain the recording of the session, links to the materials, and contact details, should you want to get ahead. Okay, so that's all from me. I'll pass over to Rachele now. Rachele?
Thank you so much, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar. As Mike mentioned, this is a topic I'm extremely passionate about, and I'm very, very excited about this new research that we have conducted recently and that we will be sharing here with you today. So I'm going to go straight into it. What I'm going to focus on today is really, talking about the multi-generational workforce. So of course now, in the workplace, we have a number of different generations with Generation Z on its way. So it's important for employers to understand what this means for an organization. And we will see that it's not always all positive, but also, what it is that brings these generations together. What are some of the commonalities and differences, and what companies can really do to ensure that they can really harmonize their multi-generational workforce. So I'm not going to focus too much on Universum. You guys know who we are, but obviously we've been conducting research with generations for the past 30 years, obviously serving baby boomers back in the day, and then Gen Xers, and then in 2005 releasing the first big piece of global research on millennials, and most recently the research on Generation Z as well. This information that I share with you today, of course, is based on data that we've collected across 60+ countries around the world, and that we release, of course, on a yearly basis. And we also use to help companies understand, how different generations perceive them as employers compared to their competitors across different markets. So the agenda for today is, as you can see here, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the multi-generational workforce is today. I'm going to talk about multi-generational conflicts. Then we will talk about what does the ideal workplace look like to different generations. What are different generations afraid of when it comes to their future career or current career? And then, of course, find out whether generations are hopeful about their future work life. And finally, some recommendations on how you as an employer can customize your management style to different generations so that you can not only attract them, of course, but you can also manage to retain them and make sure that they work together in a harmonized way. So we've been all millennials to death over the last 11, 12 years. But of course, millennials are still a very, very strong force to be reckoned with. With the entry of Generation Z, which is about to take place over the next couple of years, there will be up to 4 generations in the workplace. So when we look at it, we see that by 2025, millennials and Gen Z will make up more than 75% of the global workforce. And then you have companies out there, like the accounting firm, for example, where already 86% of their current workforce is millennials already. So what does it look like? So when it comes to millennials specifically, we know there's about 2.3 billion of them out there. The turnover rate of millennials is obviously twice that of older workers. And for an organization of thousands of people, the cost of replacing millennials could be millions every year. But now, just as companies are starting to get used to millennials and start to understand them, Generation Z is coming on board. So, the challenge that companies will be facing going forward is how can they manage and motivate a multi-generational workforce that, of course, is going to have different values, different preferences, different lifestyles, and so on and so forth, so that they can successfully meet their business goals. So we can't start any conversation about generations really without trying to understand them. I think that is at the basis of really, the biggest challenges that companies are facing. As Mike mentioned, I do tons of workshops with companies, from CEOs to executives to frontline managers to the millennials that are coming into organizations themselves to really help them understand about each other, what they can expect from each other, how they all come from different backgrounds, and some kind of insight into how they can work together effectively. And every time I do this, I really feel like a couples therapist, because there's a lot of tension and a lot of underlying conflict at the beginning, especially when it comes to millennials and baby boomers. But then at the end of the day, when you start sharing with millennials where baby boomers really come from and why they are the way they are and what the reality of the workplace was when they were in their 20s, and then you talk to baby boomers about why millennials are the way they are and why they may be perceived as being arrogant or entitled or need so much mentorship, you understand in the end that everybody really wants the same thing. So I think it's really about understanding the background and the context. So I'd like to just share a little bit here. When it comes to baby boomers, of course, this is still a generation in the workplace. They're born between 1946 and 1964. They represent today about 14% of the population. And when it comes to their psychographics, for them, of course, personal growth was a key goal. Autonomy and self-sufficiency, and of course the need to change the status quo. So one thing about baby boomers is that even though they're the ones that are most likely to criticize the millennials, they're the ones that are the most similar, because the baby boomers are actually the ones that started the cultural revolution in the workplace. Prior to baby boomers, you had the traditionalists and the silent generation, right? People that had to be seen and not heard. And the baby boomers, of course, were the ones that stepped up and roared and decided to change things. However, the only way that they could change things was to play the game and get to the top of these organizations and then change things from within. When it comes to Generation X, my generation, were born between 1965 and 1980. And then, of course, for those of you who have been in my workshops or presentations before, you will know that generations occur at different times across different parts of the world. In Europe and in Asia, they have occurred approximately at the same time. However, there are certain differences if you look at China or India or Southeast Asia compared to Europe. But these are kind of the broad numbers. When it comes to psychographics, they like to embrace risk. They prefer free agency to loyal corporatism. They want to be valued immediately for their skills, and they have a no guarantee philosophy. So this is also the smallest generation out there ever. We are also the first kids, sons and daughters of divorcees, so we had to really learn to fend on our own. So we really have no loyalty towards corporation, but we do have loyalty towards people. And then, of course, you have the millennials, Generation Y. Everybody's been talking about millennials now for the last more than a decade, but we know that they're born between 1981 and 1995. They represent about 17% of the population, and they have literally brought forth a huge cultural revolution in the workplace. They have really changed the way that companies think of their employees and the way that workplace are being structured and programs are being formed in order to be able to cater to future generations of talent. From a psychographics perspective, they exhibit altruism for community and environmental problems. They, are all about family. They're strong about religion and causes and generosity. These things are really central to their lives, and they really celebrate diversity to the point where they, differently from other generations who tended to hide, for example, their diverse background or not mention it or opt out of answering certain questions. In our surveys, we see that they're very, very proud to highlight every little component of their background, whether it be, ethnic or personality or so on and so forth, that makes them unique. And then you have Generation Z. This is a generation that we are yet to get to meet in the workplace. Universum last year ran the very first study on Generation Z. So we're starting to understand what they actually are thinking about when they come to their future employers. And they're really going to change everything to the point where, just to give you some hints there, they don't even think that they need to go to university. They're expecting companies to reach out to them already when they're in high school and put them through work immediately, and then for the companies to put them through whatever training they think they're going to need to be able to perform the job. So they're really, really going to change the educational molds. They represent today about 15% of the population. They're most comfortable interacting online than offline. So this is a problem, especially for companies that are looking for people to fill, customer service roles or front-facing roles. Their top priority is family time. It's followed by a successful career and also learning new things. When it comes to the work style, the baby boomers obviously looked at the big picture. They were very optimistic. They did believe that if they roared together and stood up, and they could change the system. And they did in many ways. They, however, were not confrontational. They did not like conflict, in fact, avoided it. And they also seek personal gratification. When it comes to Generation X, as I mentioned, we have survived a hurried childhood of divorce, inflation, recession. So that has made us very self-reliant and very comfortable with change. We question authority. We just don't believe in authority blindly. This is, was the case for previous generation, but not for Gen Xers. We are very goal-oriented. We think that a job is just a job, and this was the main difference between Gen Xers and then the subsequent generation of millennials. And money, of course, was a very important motivator. Why? Because when you're taught that work is something you have to suffer through and that your boss is most likely going to be nasty and make you pay the dues for all the things that they had to undergo, of course, what you're going to think about when you think about your future career is primarily brand and money and promotion opportunities. Of course, we know that millennials change that. When it comes to millennials, they want to work on their own terms. You all have experienced that by now. They want to be paid volunteers. So differently from Gen Xers who really saw work as just a job, they want to be paid. They want to earn money for doing what they're really, really passionate about. They don't want to compromise on that. They lack the skills for dealing with difficult people. In fact, in all the 12 years at Universum, working with companies across different industries, the biggest challenge is really finding people that have those soft skills and are able to work in client-facing roles or front-facing roles. They like multitasking. They really appreciate and value diversity, flexibility, and they value collective action. So differently from previous generations, where it was all about me getting to the top, millennials have the no one left behind attitude. They want to be able to succeed as a group, as a team, which is why they actually represent the most heterogeneous group of diverse, players within teams, no matter what organizations you look at, and they have very successful results when they work together. And then when it comes to Generation Z, their greatest fear regarding working life is not having a job that matches their personality. So this is really interesting because, the Generation X, for example, used to choose a job based on the fact that it matched, a specific industry because, hey, if I studied finance, of course I want to go into banking. Millennials started thinking about, the end of the Gen Xers, started thinking more about joining a company where they would have a job that they would really enjoy and that was meaningful. The millennials started looking at companies from a perspective of the environments that they provided, and now you have Generation Z, which is really looking for the perfect personal fit. All of a sudden, finding a job is very much like dating or finding the perfect partner. As they adapt easily to new technologies, of course, implementing them in their workflow is a must, which means that companies won't have the option to not allow technology in their day-to-day working environment, as well as the flexibility that technology brings about. And they look first at the friendliness of people when assessing cultural fit within an organization. So that really is the most important thing for them, is working with people that they enjoy being around. And finally, when it comes to attitudes regarding loyalty to their employers, baby boomers valued company commitment and loyalty very much. 65% of them actually would like to stay with their organization for the rest of their working life. And the average tenure of a baby boomer is actually more than 15 years. When it comes to Gen Xers, less loyal to companies, but very loyal to people. So for Gen Xers, loyalty is really everything. They're also not very likely to give trust, but when they do, again, they're very, very loyal. 40% of them would like to stay with their organization for the rest of their working life. So 25% less than baby boomers, but still a very high number. And the average tenure within an organization for a Gen Xer is about 5+ years. And then if you look at millennials or Gen Y, we know that they're committed and loyal when they're dedicated to an idea, cause, or product. 20% would like to stay with their organization for the rest of their working life. And we all know that, unfortunately, the average tenure is about 1.5 to 2 years. Now, one thing I want to highlight about millennials, and something that I often find myself disagreeing with when I encounter other generational experts or people who talk about them, is the concept that they're not loyal. In fact, if you actually look at that generation, it's only, if you go back to the baby boomers, that you find, a generation that's that likely to stick around. The only difference between them is that, of course, millennials know what they want, and they know they can ask for it, and they know they can get it. So if they can't find it in their current employer, they are going to move on. But of course, they are a generation that we know is not very risk adverse, wants their, co-workers to be their friends and wants their bosses to be their mentors, and really need that safety net. So they're not exactly the profile of a big risk taker who would, who just has it innately to just jump from one company to another. It's just that they know what they want and they know that they can pursue it. But when they find what they want and they find a company they like, they're actually quite likely to stay for a longer period of time. And then when it comes to Gen Z, 4 in 5 Gen Z students, if we look at Singapore, for example, but this is actually the same across the world. So if we look at it from a global standpoint, that number is even higher. It's 4.3. And they would consider skipping college, university if an employer offered adequate education in their field. And this is true whether we look at data from the US or Europe, or UK or France or Middle East or the more developed markets across Asia or South America or emerging markets. So again, they would be very open. So I think one question you can start asking yourself already now is, since campus recruitment is something that started as a way to engage talent, because that was the only way to find future talent before the internet, was to actually be on campus. And now all of a sudden you have the internet that doesn't really require for you to physically be there, but now you're going to be dealing with a generation that may not be there at all. So how is that going to change your organization going forward? And then finally, Gen Z students see open communication as the cornerstone of inspiring leadership. So they want to be able to have, more than open doors, no doors. They want to be able to, approach you and talk to you and get feedback and be encouraged or so on and so forth in the very same way as they are used to doing with their family. So this is just to give you a little bit of an overview of how each generation is different, and it's incredible. Since of course we are all children of the previous generation, but myself, we're five girls in my family, ranging from 37 years old to 8 years old. So we have three generations, five sisters across three generations, and I can see the differences even though the parents are the same. So it's a very interesting topic. And it's so important to understand these differences. So the other thing that I want to focus on is multi-generational conflict. So one of the things that I work with companies is really try to understand the truth or the reality behind why people leave. And of course, when you run exit interviews, talent will come to you and say, well, I got a better offer somewhere else. I got offered a higher salary. I'm looking to change industries or try something different. In reality, however, when we go back and ask the same questions to the same people, and the respondents know that it's a third party, it's not the actual company asking these questions, they're more likely to be honest, of course. We get a very different story. So what they tell us is that, of course, talking about better pay or, wanting to change or experience something new is, the most politically correct way to exit an organization in good terms and get that recommendation and so on and so forth. But in reality, there's two things that actually cause people to leave. One of them is the lack of training and development. So this is a whole other topic I'm happy to discuss with any of you at any time. But very often companies put so much focus on the training that people get when they first join an organization, especially if they come in as students or in some graduate programs. But then, once the real job starts, what is it? What is it that companies are really doing to convey the sense that employees are in fact continuing to develop, even if it's not through formal programs? And very often that's missing. And so that's what forces people to move to other organizations, because they feel that otherwise they may become obsolete and, and not learn enough to be competitive in today's, global workforce. So that's number one reason. Number two reason is actually multi-generational conflicts. So we see that actually, especially when it comes to millennials, the fact that they don't really see eye to eye with their manager, they don't believe they have the level of mentorship or guidance that they need, and so on and so forth, is actually one of the top two reasons. In many countries, it's the number one reasons why people leave organizations. So I'm using here some data from Singapore as an example. We have this data across different parts of the world, and I've presented, as Mike said, all over the world. So this is quite consistent with what we see almost everywhere. But when we ask talent, whether they find it hard to work with colleagues of other age groups, as you can see, a very high percentage of people say that yes, they either frequently or sometimes find it difficult to work with other age groups. When we look at intergenerational difficulties, we see that they tend to exist more between the millennials and the baby boomers currently. So, of course, we don't have data on Gen Z because they're not in the workforce yet. But when we ask which age group do you have more difficulty working with, we can see that early baby boomers Generation X has the hardest time working with early baby boomers, while millennials have the hardest time working with late baby boomers. And as you can see, that is quite consistent. Late baby boomers also have the hardest time working with millennials. So as an employer, what can you expect from intergenerational clashes? What is it that is going on in the workplace as a result of this that you may or may not be aware about? So there's going to be a lot of conflicts regarding acceptable work hours between workers of different generations. There's going to be the need to design benefits packages that meet the needs of multiple generations of workers. I was recently a keynote speaker at a conference here in Asia, and Maybank was also on the stage, and they were talking about how not only do they have, they no longer have normal compensation packages, but they have compensation packages based on generations. So depending on what generations they're making that offer to, they have a completely differently designed a package, which of course, for baby boomers is quite pragmatic, has a lot to do with the material benefits, with the promotion opportunities, with the time off and bonuses and so on and so forth. And then when it gets to the millennials, it's a lot less about the actual money and a lot more about all the other perks, the flexibility, the gym, the free food, the ability to, go to a yoga class at 4 p.m. or work from Bali if your wife's there on a yoga retreat, for example. But I also was sitting on a panel recently with PACnet, and they were actually saying that not only do they have compensation benefits that are based on generations, they actually have compensation packages designed based on different life stages within a generation. So if you're a millennial who's just out of school and is single, for example, you're going to have different needs. You're going to be more open to traveling and so on and so forth. The hours or the flexibility may not be as important. Then as you kind of grow and meet your loved one and start dating, building a family and so on and so forth, those needs change. So, even compensation packages, based on life stages within each generation. A growing issue will be dealing with dealing with a multi-generational workforce will be the transfer of institutional knowledge. So that's extremely important. Millennials want to know everything right now and right then. On the other hand, baby boomers very often feel that they're being left behind. They're not listened to, that their contribution is no longer required. You have this new generation who comes in and seems to know it all, and very often they feel that they have been kind of, their contribution is not as important. Baby boomers do not think the Gen Xers and millennials understand what a real day of work is. So very often, the whole idea, millennials struggle because, in previous generations, you would have to, stay at work and just to clock out at a certain time, because if you left on time, it made you look bad. It made you look like you were lazy, right? Now you have millennials, for example, who, think that as long as they can do the job, it doesn't matter how many hours a day they work. It doesn't matter where they work from or how many breaks they take or how many other things or activities they do in the meantime. We know they're, infinite multitaskers. So this is often very, very hard because baby boomers have one expectations of what being committed to your job means. And millennials, of course, don't understand that, don't agree to that. Younger generations resist authority and structure. This is something that older generations feel, and bypassing the chain of command, while others involved employees who feel having seniority get some specific jobs regardless of employees' qualifications. So this is something that we actually see a lot of. Very often baby boomers or even early Gen Xers complain that the new generations don't show reverence, don't show that sense of, reverential fear because you're older than me and you know more and I should respect you and be a little scared of you at the same time. But if you think about it, it makes perfect sense because the way in which we interact with our bosses or with senior people is usually very much aligned to the way we were used to interacting with our own family members, with our own parents. So if you think about how, probably your grandfather or your father used to interact with his father, it was very different back then. Right? It was, the culture was a bit more punitive. You had to kind of be silent, and there was like tough love, and you would kind of really respect your dad, but be a bit scared of him, and there wasn't that open communication that you're used to having now. So of course, when these people would go and meet a senior, somebody that reminded them of their father in the workplace, the relationship was very much similar. The dynamics were similar. Now, if you look at millennials or Gen Z, they go out and they party with their parents, they drink a beer with their parents, they talk to them about their private lives and their love and everything. So of course, they don't know reverence. They don't know what it means. So when they meet somebody that reminds them of their dad in the workforce, they're likely to have the same level of interaction. Baby boomers often have a hard time understanding that, despite the fact that they are the fathers in question, which is also quite interesting. Older generations also being perceived as reluctant to change the way they're used to doing their jobs, while workers from younger generations are more eager to constantly try new ideas. So this is often a really big problem. But we know, of course, that while it's important that we leverage the knowledge and the experience that baby boomers have gained throughout the years, the millennials are the ones who soon will be taking the reins of these companies. So, and then we'll be bringing these companies into the future. So it's important, of course, to listen to them while at the same time making sure that all the learnings from previous generations are also factored in. And then finally, as firms seek to be more meritocratic with promotions, we see that older generations can be dismayed to find that their years of service are no longer a guarantee of advancement, and that as digital skills become more important, younger workers are whizzing past them. So all of a sudden you have, kids who come in and, within 2 or 3 years in the organization, they make the same amount of money or they get the equal promotion that it would take someone from a previous generation's years and years to get to. And of course, that can create problems. And then, of course, there's many more, but these are the primary ones, and we have limited time. So, and then if you look at what each generations think of other generations, this is part of a study I've run uniquely for some workshops that I'm doing with organizations. But what is the difficulty in working with millennials? When we ask baby boomers, they think that millennials have short attention span. They're overconfident. They're impatient. They are unrealistic. They have unrealistic ideas about work. They lack commitment. They only want to be promoted and fast. They don't show respect to senior staff, which goes back to that reverence. And they're also job hoppers, which, again, you're talking to a generation that was, 65% of them were willing to stay with their employers for a lifetime. So, of course, to them, a 1 to 2 year tenure is very hard to grasp. And then when you ask up to Gen X what they think about working with millennials, you see lack of knowledge, attitude problems, they're arrogant, they're not open to feedback, they're not mature, they don't know hardship, they're self-centered, they're detached from work. And then if you ask, Gen X, what the difficulty is working with Gen X, baby boomers think that Gen X are overambitious. We think we know it all. We think that older employees are outdated, that we like to show our power. We don't accept comment. They're too demanding. We're insensitive to others. While millennials think that Gen Xers have preformed mindsets. They want to do it their way. They think they know it all, and they're smarter than you. And then finally, what is the difficulty working with baby boomers? When we ask millennials, millennials think that baby boomers are not open to new ideas, they're not willing to learn, they're stubborn in their values and opinions, they're unwilling to take risks, and very similarly, Generation X says that baby boomers don't listen, that they're inflexible, they do not have respect for younger staff, they're resilient to change, and they do it their own way. So, again, this is some examples taken from a study that were recently run here in Singapore I'm based out of, but, I have similar data and I have run workshops all over, and the data is extremely consistent all over the world. So, lots of differences. As I mentioned, at the end of the day, we all want the same things. I usually finish my workshop with a checklist of things, asking baby boomers if they wouldn't have liked, to have more flexibility or a job they loved or something they were passionate about or more time with family, and everybody raises their hand. So it's really about understanding where everyone comes from. And the other thing that's also interesting is that when it comes to what the ideal workplace looks like, there are not that many differences between generations. When you sit down and ask a baby boomer what the ideal workplace is, or a Gen Zer or a Gen Xer, it's not that different than millennials. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. The difference is that millennials know they can ask for it, and companies are adapting to that because they desperately need them. Previous generations didn't have that luxury. So what I would like to do is guide you through a study that we've recently conducted, and the whole point for running this webinar in the first place. And it's a study that covers about 20,000 Generation Z students, Generation Y students, and Generation Y professionals, and so millennials, both students and professionals, and then Generation X professionals across 19 different countries. So of course, when it comes to Generation Z, it will be students. Millennials, you have some students, some professionals. Generation X are exclusively professionals across different countries. So you can see here what the countries are that are included in this study. So you can see very strong representation from every single region. And as Mike mentioned, the research was conducted by Universum in cooperation with NCAD, the head of foundation, and the MIT Leadership Center. So we already talked about the different generation. I don't think that there's that big of a need to focus on it. But what I do want to highlight is really how these generations feel about the current workplace now. So Generation Z are, as defined in the study, are high school students that are born between 1997 and 2002. We didn't survey earlier Gen Zers because they would be too young. They probably wouldn't have strong enough feeling or idea of what the future may hold from a work perspective. And when it comes to this generation, they're poised to enter the workplace soon. We know that. They're coming. It's just a matter of a couple of years. This generation was born into a tumultuous world. I mean, we've all witnessed it lately, demonstrated to them in all of the VUCA glory. So for those of you who don't know VUCA, it means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, through a wide variety of screens, because we know that they have this, they're hit with information from multiple sources. They fear for the future of the planet. They fear for the value that education may actually have in the future, based on the fact that they consider it to be something that may become redundant very soon. They worry about their future careers, and they want to make the world a better place, but differently from millennials who wanted to make the world a better place, and they were very idealist in the sense that they do believe they can do it by working for the public or private sector. Generation Z is more likely to believe that, hey, if we really want to change things, we have to do it single-handedly. They're completely digital native in the sense of being quite helpless in a non-digital world, and again, that is going to be a problem. So anything that companies do to start teaching some of those soft skills, those person-to-person skills, same as universities and so on and so forth, is going to be super important. When it comes to Generation Y, one of the most visible generations, as we've seen already, they basically have forced a new look at everything, from Maslow's need hierarchy to how companies do business and the future of the workplace. They are growing up with unprecedented access to technology and information. They changed everything from whether cars are best bought or shared, or how long it's okay to live with parents, or what kind of behavior is acceptable from employees and leaders. And then, of course, again, Gen X. So we'll be focusing on these three generations. And we know that Gen X, small generation, is sandwiched between baby boomers and the millennials. We have 2 decades in the workplace. Quietly, we have taken up position of power in multinational C-suites, as well as in the ranks of successful entrepreneurs. We experienced childhood without computers. We witnessed the shift from analog to digital technology in their adulthood. At work, we know that we're taking over the mantle from the baby boomers, and we are the ones actually mentoring Generation Y. At home, we're caring for their boomer parents and also their millennial kids who refuse to leave the home. So we'll be looking now at these three groups. The interesting thing here is the need for freedom is a consistent theme. So again, when we really look into it and we start asking people from different generations, what is the one thing that an employer has to offer to become an ideal employer, you can actually see that freedom is at the core of every group. It's the #1 word that comes out, whether you're talking to Generation Z, to Generation Y, or to Generation X. However, if you look at it, you can see that Generation Z is very focused on respect. They value respect very much. They had tons of it from their parents. But also money is very important. I mean, they started witnessing, the challenges that are going on with the global economy, and even while millennials kind of dropped money because it was kind of a hygiene factor, and they focus on different things. Gen Z wants the same things, but they're a little more pragmatic about it. When it comes to Generation Y, it's mostly about flexibility and opportunities. So these are very, very important for them. And when it comes to Generation X, as you can see, is about trust, the ability to really trust the people that you work with. But again, not that many differences. So at the end of the day, all these differences, all these kind of judgments or ideas or preformed notions that I just explored with you, as you can see, there's more commonalities than not. The other thing that's interesting is when we ask talent about the characteristics of the ideal workforce, of the ideal workplace culture, you can see that so the question here was, how important are the following characteristics in deciding to work for a particular organization? And you can see that belief in my ability to grow and develop is super important. It's the #1 most important to every single subgroup in this study. Support for taking initiative is also extremely important, and also a culture of integrity. And then the top 3 things that are most diverging among generations is a culture of integrity. So we see, for example, that professionals, Generation X and Y, value more a culture of integrity, while students, Generation Y and Z, more support for taking initiatives. And of course, this is because they haven't been in the workforce yet, and they're a little less risk adverse. And then, as you can see, also top-down decision-making is more important to people who have been in the workplace for a longer period of time, but definitely not important at all to the younger generations. When it comes to the characteristics of ideal workplace culture, again, we see divergent preferences that show up between genders. So something that's quite interesting is that when it comes to the ability to network inside and outside the company, you can see that it's important almost equally to both groups. For Generation Y, for example, it's more important to females. But specifically when it comes to support for risk-taking, females find that to be extremely, extremely important. And of course, we know usually that females are a little more fearful in a certain way in making risks, because historically it's more acceptable, has been more acceptable for, men have been louder. We also know that, very often men are paid more, not because companies pay them more, but because they're better at asking for raises. Females are more likely to settle, less likely to negotiate, and so on and so forth. So we can see that especially for Gen Z, females, support for risk-taking, really encouraging them to make that risk is super important. And then on the other hand, it's quite interesting because when it comes to top-down decision-making, it's much more important for males. And when it comes to a culture of integrity across all generations, definitely much more important to females. Now, if we look into the next slide here, what we did is we asked talent if they had to choose an employer for the rest of their career, who would they choose? And you can see that Generation Z and Generation Y, they say that they would like to work for an international company more than any other company. While on the other hand, when it comes to professionals, so basically students feel they want to work for an international company, while when we look at professionals, whether older Generation Y or Gen X, they would actually like to start their own business. So of course, this comes from having been in the workplace, having experienced the limitations of, having to report to someone or having to follow specific rules or, be part or play the corporate game. And they're more interested in the idea of becoming their own bosses. And then as you can see, working for a startup is not that interesting. So we see a lot of entrepreneurial profiles, but these are people that really want to be their own bosses. They don't want to report to someone else. So the appeal is not really in the startup itself. It's in the ability to actually have the flexibility, be your own boss, and really work for something that you truly believe in. And then, of course, one more thing that I think is important is that our research shows that women are more likely to want to work for a global company and less likely to feel the tug of entrepreneurship. While, of course, that's not the same when we look at men. Flexibility, seen as rising expectation of work. So when we look at developments in flexible working hours, we see that they represent a big opportunity for my work life in the next 10 years, according to pretty much every generation. And then developments in flexible job locations represent a really big opportunity for my work life in the next 10 years. So both the working hours and the flexibility of the location are extremely important. Of course, as you can see, they're more important to millennials. In fact, they are the ones that actually started, right, driving attention around the whole concept of flexibility to begin with. A little less important to Generation X and Generation Z. However, you can see that they're equally important to all generations. So it's important for employers to understand what flexible means for key members of their workforce. Very often companies come to me and say, hey, we're a bank, there's no way we can compete with Google. How can we possibly talk about flexibility? But of course, every company offers some level of flexibility. It all depends on, what it means to specific members of your workforce, what's true internally, what it is that you can comfortably talk about, and also how it is defined by people that you're really looking to bring on board. So thinking about whether younger workers would view it differently than older workers, or if there are specific aspects of flexibility that appeal in one country over another, or what solutions make sense for a particular industry, company, location, or even area of work. These are all things that companies should think about when they talk about flexibility. It's not just about, like I said, flex hours and so on and so forth. When we look at countries where individuals are most likely to want to start their own business, you can see that it's pretty much across the globe. Very, very consistent. Employers are no longer competing against other companies for talent, but they're really vying to attract employees who might otherwise want to work independently. And this has become even more true with Generation Z, where if you've read our recent white papers last year or heard any of my presentations or workshops, we see that up to 86% of Generation Z, 89% in a market like Indonesia, for example, which in the whole world is going to be the country where most entrepreneurial profiles will come from when it comes to the new upcoming generation, Gen Z. But up to 86% are actually thinking about, or have an interest in starting their own company. You're talking about, 14 to 18% with millennials when we looked at the same study a few years ago, and that already created a lot of trouble for companies. So now you're talking at, about 7 out of 10 for Gen Z. So definitely something to think about. Again, you won't be competing necessarily with other companies, but really vying to attract employees who might otherwise want to work independently. And then when it comes to the ideal employer type, if we look at the 4 different groups, for Generation Z, you can see that when we ask them if you had to choose a kind of employer for the rest of your career, they would work for an international company or organization. That is priority 1 for the majority of countries. Priority 2, as you can see, is start your own business. And priority 2 is start your own business, and priority 3 is work for a privately owned national company or organization. However, localization is extremely important because, for example, while working for an international company or organization is priority 1 for most of the countries in the study, when it comes to the US and Canada, for example, that's not a top priority at all. It's priority 3. When it comes to starting your own business, it's extremely important in Canada, in the US, and in Mexico, for example. So all of North America, while it's not that important in the UK. When it comes to working for a privately owned organization, it's extremely important to many of these countries. You can see the Nordics and Germany and France and China and Japan and so on and so forth. But it's actually even more important to UK and US and so on and so forth. So I think it's extremely important to look at it from a market-to-market basis. Working for the government is extremely appealing in Canada, as well as in Singapore and in Italy and in India and in Russia, while working for a state-owned company organization among Generation Z is very appealing if we look at a market like Switzerland. When it comes to Gen Y, you can see there's not that big of a difference, but what's interesting here is that working for a privately owned national company or organization is not in the top 3 priorities for any of the countries that we have actually surveyed. So it's quite interesting to see how, it is quite appealing for the new generation, Gen Z, but Gen Y don't find that to be as appealing, even though we do see that when we look at specific countries, the local privately owned national company organizations are starting to get to the top of our ideal employer rankings. And then when we look at Gen Y, if we look at professionals, you can see that actually there's more diversification here. You can see priority 1 starting their own business, but for Germany, for example, Italy, Sweden, and so on and so forth is not as important. Working for an international company, again, priority 3 in the US. Working for a state-owned company or organization is quite appealing in Germany. So again, it's very important, and unfortunately we don't have time to look at all of your markets in detail, but do reach out to us if you want to have that discussion. It's so important to be able to look at it market by market, especially if you're in a global role where you need to kind of roll your EVP and attract talent across the world. And finally, you can see very similar differences when it comes to Generation X. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of how there are consistencies, but also very strong differences depending on the markets that you look at. Finally, I mean, if we look at the rise of the gig economy, this is something that is going to be a huge, huge, huge topic going forward. Here in Singapore, I sit on a HR committee, a strategic committee with European multinationals, and we sit down and talk about what the future of HR is going to be like and so on and so forth. And of course, the topic of independent workforce is huge. So with the evolving dynamics of the talent market and the digitalization of work, it is now viable to make the leap into sustainable independent work, thus creating new ways of working. So according to a new study actually that we've been looking at from Upwork, the freelance economy grew to an estimate 55 million Americans in 2016. So this is actually 35% of the US total workforce. When asked the top reasons for freelancing, we see that of course, full-time freelancers say that it's their desire for autonomy and flexibility. And when we look at the combined gross income of nearly 1.1 trillion in 2016, which is over 6% of the US GDP, they're of course a very strong force that you're going to be dealing with. There's a number of different types of freelancers. 35% today are represented by independent contractors. These are traditional freelancers. They don't have employer and instead do freelance temporarily or supplemental work on a project-to-project basis. You have moonlighters here, as you can see, 25%. These are professionals with a primary traditional job who also moonlight doing freelance work on the side. You have diversified workers, 28%. These are people with multiple sources of income from a mix of traditional employers and freelance work. And then, of course, you have temporary workers, although smaller percentage, 7%. These are individuals with a single employer, client job, or contract project where the employment status is just temporary. And of course, finally, you have freelance business owners. So these are business owners with between 1 and 5 employees who consider themselves both a freelancer and a business owner. And then, of course, you'll start hearing more and more the word super tramp. So super tramp are highly skilled professionals. These are typically come from big corporations and consulting firms. They also started to make the shift into the gig economy. Noted is also a higher reported job satisfaction with autonomy and also the ability, of course, to select what projects you want to work for based on your personal interests. And I think super temp are going to be very important for you because according to a recent report, 2016 State of Independence in America by MBO Partners, an estimated 39.8 million people are working independently in 2016 if we look at the U.S. alone. And of course, with the autonomy and the ability to select projects, job satisfaction appears to be extremely high. And so more and more people are likely to want to move in this direction. If you compare this to the average satisfaction score of contracted employees is much, much, much higher. Now, what are different generations afraid of? I think the fears are quite consistent. The 3 overall greatest fear when it comes to their future work life is that they will get stuck with no development opportunities. This is particularly true for Gen Y professionals. Again, they're the ones that really value continuing to learn, that they won't get a job that matches their personality, and that there will be no job security for their generation. And the most diverging among the different generations is that they won't be able to enjoy my retirement. Of course, as can be expected, professionals, older people who are already in the workplace, they're more likely to worry about that as opposed to people who are just getting started, that they will work too much. So this is something that Gen Y really has an issue with. I mean, these are people that really value work-life balance, and then they enter the workforce, very often promised from companies that they will have that work-life balance, but actually end up realizing how much they actually have to work. So of course that's really important for them. Gen Z doesn't seem to be thinking about that as much, of course, because they don't have that experience yet. And then that they will underperform, and this is something that is very common among the younger generations, particularly Generation Z. They're very scared. They don't know what the future will hold, of course, and they're afraid that they may not be good enough to be able to be successful in today's multinational and global environment. The fear of being stuck with no development opportunities is high in nearly every country surveyed. As I mentioned, is also one of the #1 reasons, either #1 or #2 across the world, as to why your employees leave for other companies. So I think this is something that you can consider to be a top priority. How do you actually continue to convey a sense of growth, even when there are no formal programs attached? And similarly, there is a pervasive fear of personality misalignment within the job. And as you can see, the fact that they may not find a job that matches their personality is extremely important across all generations. 42% with Gen X, all the way up to 53% with Generation Z. Women are also more afraid of their future work life. So when we look at females, we see that they are quite worried that they will not get the chances they deserve because of their gender. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier, we can see that females have a little bit more fear in terms of what it's going to mean and whether companies are really able to integrate them in the very same way as they do with men. So this is something that may be important for you to address in your diversity recruitment efforts, especially when you're dealing with females. We also see that the majority of all generations are hopeful about their future work life, especially when you look at it, Generation Z and Generation Y students. So the younger generations are more hopeful that things will be okay, while Generation X, as you can see, is a little bit more skeptical. And finally, in the last few minutes, I'd like to share some recommendations with you. How can you customize your management style to these different generations? We've seen that there's a lot of conflicts, a lot of apparent differences, but in the end, they all very much seem to like the same things. So if we look at motivation, how it differs across different generations, you will see that millennials generally rank advancement potential and free time higher than Gen X and baby boomers, while on the other hand, millennials view responsibility and compensation as less important. So these are things things, for example, that you need to keep into account. You want to localize your messaging, potentially even your compensation packages to address these things that matter the most to different generations. Different needs of a multi-generational workforce. So when it comes to career mindset, baby boomers, they are thinking a lot about retirement and work-life balance. Generation X is really thinking about wanting to reach that management position as well as work-life balance. Millennials are go-getters. They want to really make an impact within the organization, and they also want flexibility and advancement. And Generation Z wants to learn and grow, and they need career direction. So they need you to actually mentor them and provide them with insight and information to help them figure out where they're going to be successful. So the best way to retain top employees depends on the generational makeup of your organization. When it comes to baby boomers, as we can see, it's not about retaining them, but it's about creating a smooth plan for retirement. When it comes to Generation X, retention can be achieved through providing leadership and management roles, for example, incorporating succession planning and providing meaningful work. Millennials are not just looking for financial compensation, but they're also looking for the opportunity to progress. So these are all things that you need to keep in mind. When it comes to managing baby boomers, they oppose to the command and control management styles of early generations. They're motivated by position, responsibility, perks, and prestige. Their motivator, as we saw, is financial security and wellness programs. So possible programs that you may want to implement to be able to successfully manage them is phased retirement programs, allows for slow departure from a company, or offer part-time work with benefits for a time period before the full retirement, or even mentoring programs where they have an opportunity to actually, share their experience with younger generations and still feel relevant. Managing Generation X, engagement and succession planning programs. So for example, for career development, preparing for the retiring of baby boomers, providing training and development that's focused on developing transferable skills, offer tuition reimbursement, for example, for continuing to educate themselves, empower them in decision making, providing freedom to work on projects that interest them within or outside of the organization, and also seek flexible work arrangements so that they can actually balance their family and work. And finally, managing millennials. The emphasis is on purpose. We know that. You need to create a collaborative working environment. You need to provide feedback and recognition. You need to develop them. You need to focus on their career advancement and professional and also personal improvement. Provide flexible work arrangement and provide perks in the workplace. Gym, free food, work outings. I mean, everybody heard about Google and so on and so forth. So when it comes to leading a collaborative multi-generational workplace, create cross-generational learning opportunities, mentorship, reverse mentorship, adapt your communication style to the preferences of the generation at work, encourage collaborative decision making for an opportunity to express mutual respect and inclusivity, build emotional connections, provide flexibility, enhance employee engagement, train managers to foster trust and collaboration among teams. So these are all things that are going to be extremely important. So things to ask yourself. Think of the HR program, policy, or benefit that you would recommend for managing each generation. How do you effectively engage each generation? What is their background? Where do they come from? What do they expect of you? What do you really expect from them? And so on and so forth. And finally, state purpose. This is super important. State purpose early and state purpose often. Purpose comes in many forms. We see that CSR is but one of them. But when we ask more generations across the world, whether it's baby boomers or Gen Z, what they think about purpose, it's creating value for the customer, is positively impacting the wider society, is inspiring innovation, is providing employees with a sense of meaning and fulfillment, it's generating financial returns for shareholders, and so on and so forth. And then you can see that employees whose leaders talk about purpose demonstrate a lot greater satisfaction with their employers. So as you can see, people who said, I feel the work I do makes an impact, 80% are actually employees whose leaders communicate purpose versus 39% employees whose leaders do not communicate purpose. They feel inspired and encouraged to strive for continuous improvement. 91% for people with leaders who communicate purpose. Likewise, as you can see, I am proud to work for a specific company. This is based on some KPMG study that was recently released in 2015. So again, it's important that your leaders communicate purpose as well. And then just to wrap it up, I have a couple examples of incredible companies. If you look at Patagonia, for example, you can see that this is an example of a company that encompasses many aspects of bringing life to purpose to life. I saw a documentary years ago. I was shocked about the things that they do. Seeing sick employees with headaches in their stores, they had the hypothesis that it's due to formaldehyde in their cotton clothes they sell. So this actually led them to commission a study of conventional cotton and the discovery that cotton grown with pesticides is one of the most destructive crops in the agricultural world. Thus, they went organic in 1996. And then from cotton, they went through every step in their supply chain. They measure the environmental impacts of their clothing. They worked with an outside auditor, CSR specialist, to establish the working conditions and pay for every person who actually sews one of their garments. Continue to support employees with medical insurance, maternity, paternity leave, subsidized childcare, and so on. And for many years, they also gave 1% of sales to grassroots activists. And then in 2014, they unveiled a higher purpose initiative and so on and so forth, which you may want to read about. And then KPMG as well. I mean, this is a great example of a company that is focusing a lot on encouraging people to celebrate the meaning and positive impact of the work that they do. So they started this initiative with corporate posters and a We Shape History video, which addressed the questions, what do you do at KPMG, and how is your career growing, and so on and so forth. So these are all examples of fantastic organizations. It's always important to investigate the root out feelings of fear in the workplace, address those. We have examples of companies, Singtel, which have done amazing jobs when it comes to leadership development, developing emerging and future leaders, and learning and career development as key drivers of staff engagement. So these are all companies that you can look into for inspiration. And then finally, remember that cultural fit will be your strategic priority. We saw that cultural fit is important to all, older employees and younger employees and upcoming employees. So you need to make sure your employees know what your organization stands for, what unites their work effort, what it is, what is it something they believe is worth working for, and so on and so forth, and make sure that you actually incorporate that. Zappos is a fantastic company that has done that. They even offer $2,000 to new hires to leave if they don't, think that the company is the right fit to them, because they really realize that having the right people delivers that customer experience that can make the business grow. So again, we're out of time. I wanted to thank you for listening in today. I hope this information was useful. It's a lot of insight. I'm happy to take it with you one-on-one if you'd like to know more, or explore possibilities of running similar workshops for your company or for your employees as well. So I'll pass it on back to Mike.
Thanks a lot, Rachele. Really great stuff. Yeah, like you said, we've gone a bit over time. We've been trying to answer as many questions as we can as we've gone along privately. So hopefully that includes most of your questions, guys. For those that we've not got round to, we will come to those individually rather than now with everyone on the call, because a lot of people have said they're needing to get off at the end of the hour. So we'll check out now. What we'll do is we'll send the recording of today's session, the deck from today, and the other relevant materials out in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours for everybody that was here today. So just sit tight and we'll get all of that. If we didn't answer your question, we'll also try and get around to those as well. So thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Rachele. Thank you, everyone who joined. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.